So the whole notion of conscious machines, is that realistic? And a lot of people have great doubts about this. If you're a student, say, of a specialty called embryogenesis, in other words, how the baby grows, and you study the mechanisms of how that's done, it's being built from molecules, and molecules made out of atoms. And so by putting certain molecules together in the right way, you can generate consciousness, you can generate intelligence.
I think consciousness is a difficult situation. Even if you look at animals now, bees and cows, are they conscious? I would say they are. They're doing their own thing, they've got their own life. It's very different to human consciousness and to how we think. And with a machine, it becomes even more complicated because almost surely the machine does have its values, it does have a goal, something that it's trying to achieve. But it's perhaps only when it starts to do its own thing and humans can't really understand why it's doing that thing fully, or it starts communicating with other machines and we don't fully understand what it's saying to other machines. That's when I think we've got to start saying it's conscious.
Man has described himself in many ways. But if we concentrate on man in relation to his control over his environment, no description is more apt than the description of man as a tool-making animal. And in the short history of mankind, the majority of the tools which man has made can be thought of as an extension of his muscle power. However, in the mid-1940s of the 20th century, a different kind of tool was invented. A tool for extending certain of the powers of man's mind. This tool Dr. Richard Hamming, a research mathematician for the Bell Telephone Laboratories, in a paper presented before a meeting of the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, put it this way.
The computer revolution is often compared with the famous Industrial Revolution in importance and scope. The Industrial Revolution effectively freed man from being a beast of burden. The computer revolution will similarly free him from dull, repetitive routine. The computer revolution is, however, perhaps better compared with the Copernican or the Darwinian revolution, both of which greatly changed man's idea of himself and the world in which he lives.
The past predictions of AI researchers, especially in the early days of the 50s and 60s, turned out to be completely wrong. Now, the question is what lesson we should draw from that. Should we draw the lesson that because we haven't yet developed human-level artificial intelligence, therefore we never will? Or should we rather draw the lesson that it's harder than we thought it would be originally, but we'll probably get there, it's just a matter of time.
What's the computing capacity equivalent of our human brain compared to, say, today's supercomputers? What is there a big gap? The number of brain cells in our heads, it's estimated about 100 billion. But it's more complicated than that because each neuron, each brain cell in our brain, on average, connects to, let's say, 10,000 others. It sends out these branching like processes that connect up with other neurons. Now, when you do all the math, that works out at about 100,000 trillion bits of information a second. 100,000 trillion. Yeah, that's a very powerful computer. And humanity, technology, we're not quite there yet. But 10 years or so. Those of you who have PCs, each model that you get is faster, there's more memory, and it's more or less the same price. This phenomenon is called Moore's Law.
Well, Moore's Law is just saying that every 18 months, so the technological power doubles. And that's been followed for many, many years now. And despite people saying, no, it's not going to be followed next year or the year after, it always happens. I think it's looking in terms of brains. Moore's law is providing us with super intelligent brains. It's saying that in 10 to 15 years' time, we are going to have machine brains with processing capabilities much more powerful than the human brain.
I think that we've had the computing power around for artificial intelligence for quite a while. We just don't know how to organize it. We don't know how to turn it into a thinking mind. Lack of computing power is an excuse that people use for not having this fundamental understanding of how to create minds.
Massive bit processing rates, that's not the same thing as massive intelligence. So, just being able to process a large number of bits a second, that doesn't automatically mean that computer is going to be highly intelligent. Agreed, I agree with that. What else do you need to make a machine that can process zillions of bits a second? What else do you have to give it to make that machine intelligent? Well, you've got to have the right circuitry, right? You've got to have the same sort of brain circuits that exist in our brain, but we don't know how to do that yet.
There is a strong tendency to speak of the machine as solving the problem, when in fact, really it is the program which describes to the machine what the machine is to do. This is overlooked, and I think a great deal of confusion arises from this. It is not that we do not have adequate machines to solve our problems many times, but rather we lack adequate descriptions of how to solve the problem. And this is a very important point to understand.
There are very few people who are directly trying to create super intelligent machines. And there are lots of people who are working on creating precursors that will eventually assist in the creation of super intelligent machines. So we have the whole computing industry that is producing faster computers each year. We have neuroscientists who learn more and more about how the human brain manages to be intelligent.
Today, we spend a lot of money, for example, on our cars or our house. The big ticket items. How much money will we spend to have a really intelligent robot? I mean, that's genuinely useful. Babysit the kids, read stories to you, have a conversation with. I mean, if it were truly useful, how much would people be prepared to pay for that? A lot of money.
All of these forces inexorably lead down the path where superintelligence will eventually become possible. And it's extremely difficult to see how this could be halted. How this process could be stopped, because at each little step along the road there are great benefits to be had from faster computers and so forth, and at no point is there a natural place to stop.
And if we look back through history, then whenever humanity has progressed, has come up with new technologies, those technologies have not gone away. The people that have not wanted the technology to happen have not had their way in the end. They've disappeared, they've just had to get on with it. They've just had to accept that humanity moves forward. Progress, that's what we're about.
These molecular-based artificial brains that you're putting into your household gadgets to make them smarter and smarter every year, they'll be thinking 1,000,000 times faster than we do. That's sort of like doing a PhD in 3 minutes.
When you went from chimps to humans, there was this sudden increase in generally applicable intelligence. Like, all of a sudden, we figured out not just how to do one thing like play chess, but all of a sudden there were beings around on the planet in the blink of an evolutionary eye who could play chess and write symphonies and build airplanes and do science and all these other things. So there were previously all kinds of organisms on the planet like beavers that could solve specialized problems like building dams. But when humans came along, the innovation there was that we had significantly more generally applicable intelligence, which we abbreviate as general intelligence, as if we could solve any problem, which of course we can't. But this tremendously wide range of solvable problems is what you do not see in artificial intelligence today.
A computer scientist once remarked that we have machines that compute with the speed of light, but with the intelligence of the earthworm. While it is true that the computer can be called a kind of brain, although a very limited one, in order to solve any problem, the computer must first be instructed by a human programmer who has painstakingly and logically analyzed the problem.
I think if you looked at the best, the most intelligent, the most powerful robot with a computer for a brain, I'd have to say at the moment they're still probably around the bee and the wasp category. So we're talking tens of thousands of brain cells.
We can get artificial intelligence levels to, say, about 8 level. And I see that taking many decades. That's going to be a really tough problem. But I think once that's reached, I don't think it would take too long to get to human brain level. And then once you've got that, then off it goes. It's thinking a million times faster, right? So it could start doing experiments on itself and everything at great speed, and we just look at it and watch it grow in real time almost. It's called, a lot of people call this concept the singularity.
The singularity is a hypothetical point in the future where technological development is so rapid that the world is radically transformed within a brief period of time. Usually, the cause of the singularity is envisaged to be the development of superhuman artificial intelligence that can rapidly enhance itself. My view is that the singularity scenario is definitely one of the most likely scenarios. It's an open question when it will happen, and we're not sure that it will happen, but it's certainly a possibility that should be taken very seriously when we're thinking about the future prospects of our species.
The brain runs at 200 cycles per second. It's neurons sending signals to each other at a maximum of maybe 150 meters per second. If you had neurons as fast as transistors and they were sending signals to each other at light speed, you could get at least 1,000,000-fold improvement in speed of thinking. Not even talking about better software, just pure speed of thinking. There's room for 1,000,000 times as much intelligence on this planet as there is right now. And an event of that magnitude so far overshadows everything else on the game board. This is where the fate of intelligent life for the next billion years over who knows how many galaxies, it gets decided probably in this generation here on Earth just before the singularity.
If in the 30s you met somebody saying pretty soon, 5-10 years into the future, it will be possible to build one bomb so powerful that it could wipe out a whole city, well, most people would just laugh at it and think the guy's a nutcase, right? Because at that time, early 30s, the biggest bomb would probably blow up a building or something. The nuclear physicists of that time were starting to speculate about the possibility of a chain reaction. And the theorists at the time, say towards the late 30s, knew this and were starting to get very worried. They were scared that maybe humanity could be wiped out. But people didn't take them seriously. Certainly the general public did not take them seriously because it just sounded so nutty.
It took a long time to develop the physics underlying the nuclear weapon. At the heart of the nuclear weapon, or at least the original nuclear weapon, the atom bomb, was something called a chain reaction. An atom of uranium splits, it sends out neutrons, the neutrons knock into other uranium atoms and split them. If you were to look at a physicist doing the equations, you'd say, look at how long it's taking him to do those equations. Atom bombs must be very slow. But the chain reaction runs on a different time scale than the physicist does. Artificial intelligence, if it's making itself a little smarter and using that increased intelligence to make itself a little smarter, that cycle could conceivably run on a tremendously fast time scale, the time scale of transistors. So people say that artificial intelligence is progressing very slowly, but that means that artificial intelligence scientists are progressing very slowly. Doesn't mean that an actual artificial intelligence, once it starts to happen, will happen slowly.
So it really makes you think hard. Do other people, the brain builders of the future, the equivalent of the nuclear physicists of the 30s and 40s, it makes you think really hard. Do you want to be part of this?
So the way to think of a superintelligence is not to think of a computer as it is today, that's just a little bit better. Instead, a superintelligence we should think of as a kind of all-around human genius, but even more so. The lesson from this for us humans is that when we create superintelligent machines, we need to be extremely careful to build a goal system that will actually be meaningful and that will be friendly to human interest. In a sense, it would be the last invention that humanity will ever need to make, because once you have superintelligence, that will then be better at pursuing scientific and technological research than we humans are. So the first creators of superintelligence would have an enormous responsibility to get it right.
I mean, you may argue, well, if they're so intelligent, wouldn't they realize that we, that is the human beings, that we're their parents, we built them, we created them, so wouldn't they sort of treat us with awe and respect and so forth? Well, possibly, but the big key word in this debate, whether we should build them or not, is, as I see it, the word risk. We just don't know.
Imagine asking someone in the 16th century to anticipate the 20th century. There's no chance they can tell you what a 747 looks like or how it works, but they might be able to understand that the 747 was being used to travel from one place to another, like a horse and buggy, only faster. We might be able to understand the goals of benevolent, smarter than human artificial intelligences, but the means that they used would be beyond our ability to anticipate in advance. If they're not benevolent, we might be able to understand very well that we'd all died, and what exactly had happened after that would probably not be of much relevance to us. When I originally started to work on the singularity, I wasn't thinking at all about influencing the direction. I just thought, it's intelligence, intelligence is good, let's make more intelligence. We can solve all of our planet's problems that come from being just smart enough to get ourselves into trouble and not smart enough to get ourselves out of it. Later on, when I realized that artificial intelligence wasn't going to be automatically good, that it was going to take technical skill to work on it, that changed the stakes from a few years later or a few years earlier to, does the human species survive? I think this is the most important thing in the world that anyone can work on, and that's why I'm here rather than somewhere else.
I think their feelings, their comprehension about the world, their consciousness, their understanding is and will be distinctly different from that as humans, and we won't really be able to understand why a super intelligent machine is making the decisions that it is doing. Just a simple fact that humans think about things three-dimensionally. That's fine, that's what we've evolved to do. A super intelligent machine can think in 10 or 20 dimensions. How can you reason? How can you bargain? How can you try and understand how that machine is thinking when it's thinking in dimensions that you can't conceive of?
One of the most common mistakes in thinking about what a super intelligent machine would be like is to anthropomorphize, to assume that a superintelligence would necessarily be like a human, but just a little bit more clever. A superintelligent machine wouldn't necessarily share any of our human psychology and emotions and goals. It wouldn't necessarily have a drive for self-preservation. It wouldn't necessarily have pride. It wouldn't necessarily have love or compassion. All of this depends on how we program it. A superintelligent machine could be very alien and very weird by human standards. The one thing that would define it is that whatever its goals are, it would be very good at achieving its goals.
It is scientifically understandable why we have the emotions that we do. and it's not a force that would be operating in AIs, unless some human deliberately chose to bind the AI to the way of humanity. Even the essential wisdom to look at ourselves and fear that we are not wise is something that arises from within us as humans. That's why I worry that an AI that, is built by people who didn't really understand it and just likes paper clips will see nothing wrong with just liking paper clips, because it won't share that frame of reference, that way of thinking that leads us to question the wisdom of our own goals and choices. I like to think that 1 billion years from now, there will still be minds that have some equivalent of joy, love, music, storytelling. What humans have is worth building on into the future.
Many people are attempting to use computers to replace man. I am much more interested myself in using man and machines as a working combination. I believe that some of the future is already fairly clear. It is obvious that the machines can do routine, logical consequences much more rapidly and much more accurately than a human can. Therefore, I believe we will gradually push the detailed logical parts, the methods which we use, onto the machine, and we will reserve for ourselves the creation of new ideas and the direction of the research.
I was born a human being, but that's just fate put me in that position. As a human, I'm very limited in what I can do. My mental state is very limited. I sense the world in a very limited way. There's a lot going on out there I don't know, just to start with. I would love to use technology to enhance what I've got here. Why should I put up with this limited form, this limited capability, when potentially I could have a lot more? I'm Kevin Warwick, and I'm Professor of Cybernetics at Reading University in the UK. My subject involves partly robotics, particularly building robots that have some form of intelligence, but more lately I've been involved with cyborgs, actually creating implanted individuals, particularly myself, to try and link the human brain with the computer. I would love to become a full-time cyborg if I could devote my life, as it were, to have some of the abilities that I believe a cyborg can have, even just the ability to communicate by thinking to another individual. That would be enough for me. I would go for it. I think, to be honest, the next implant experiment that I do involving myself will involve a brain implant, and I think it will be irreversible. It will be a one-way ticket.
The distinction between human enhancement and other technological capabilities we have is very blurry. So if, for example, you have a wearable computer or just a PC where you can log onto the internet and find things out, or if you have that same thing under your skin or a little chip in your brain, it's hard to see that fundamentally there's a huge difference.
I think in the short term we've got possibilities of helping an awful lot of people who have problems. They're paralysed, they have multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, maybe they're blind. But technology, by linking their nervous system, their brain, to a computer, can help. In the long term, well, it's very exciting. Not just helping individuals that have problems, but more enhancing all of us, upgrading humans, giving ourselves mental abilities that we don't have. Extra memory, extra math are just the obvious ones. Better means of communication directly by thinking to other people, and extra sensory input. I would love to be able to sense the world in infrared or ultraviolet. At the moment, as a human, I can't, but as a cyborg, I will be able to.
I am skeptical of the claim that we will become cyborgs in a very interesting sense. I think that most of the benefits of being a cyborg could be obtained by having the same technology outside the body. So instead of having a chip implanted in your brain, you could have a chip outside your brain, and then you could access it just like you do today with your computer.
I don't deny that there are going to be cyborgs. There will be cyborgs. And with nanotechnology, it will probably be possible to scan the brain in about 20 years. The resolution of the scanning will be so fine, both in time and in space, that it'll be possible just to scan the brain.
The uploading scenario, where you would scan a particular human brain at a very fine level of detail, so you could map out the neuronal structure and even the synaptic structure. And then if you had a sufficiently powerful computer, you could then implement that same computational architecture that runs on a particular human brain now to run on a computer instead. So now, if everything goes well, you will have, being in this computer implementation, the same experiences that you had before. It will feel potentially the same. You will have the same memories, and you don't necessarily notice any difference. But now you're running on a computer rather than on biological grey matter inside a cranium.
The possibility of a machine-dominated lifestyle is a distinct one. And as far as humans go, if you imagine you're a human, you're having whatever type of life you want fed down into your brain. I mean, it's just what's going on out there is what your brain perceives. There is no absolute reality. The reality to you is what your brain makes of it. Then if a machine is passing down signals that keep you completely happy, then why not be part of the Matrix? I really do think Neo in the Matrix trying to destroy things, he's a bit of a party pooper. Life for humans in a Matrix could be really cool.
So in the Matrix, people live in virtual reality, which is the world that they experience. The environment is simulated in a computer. But they're not really what we call uploads in the Matrix, because you still have the organic physical brain lying in vats and then being fed the input from the virtual reality simulation into the brains. An uploading scenario is where you would still have the virtual reality, but the brain itself would also just exist in a computer simulation. And this makes some difference. For one, you can speed up the computer by just moving the upload to a faster computer. So if the computer you're running on is 1,000 times faster than the human brain, then your thinking speed will also increase by a factor of 1,000.
Okay, well, we can do that sort of consciousness downloading and downloading a brain and all that sort of thing by, I don't know, 20, I'm guessing a bit here, 2030, 2040, whatever. That's not, to me, that's not so much the issue. It's when humanity could build real intellects. I mean, the godlike ones, right? The ones that are so superior to us, they may not care about us anymore.
I think looking at the cyborg route of upgrading humanity by, say, linking my brain with a machine brain, it does mean I've still got my human physical body with all its problems and partly my human brain with its problems. So in a way, it buys time, I guess. It allows me and other humans to evolve with intelligent machinery for a while, but ultimately intelligent machines will have the edge, because replacing body parts, even removing this what might become a bit of a liability, this brain part that is a human brain part, I guess that will happen ultimately. Just got to hope that it's a few hundred years away rather than a few years away.
Dr. Hemming, will you give me some of your summary thoughts on this computer revolution?
Well, the word revolution is used very freely these days, and yet I think there's some meaning to the words the computer revolution. We have got an increase in computers of 1,000,000-fold, decrease in costs by 1,000, as we said before. This is a very real change. But the question still arises, will this revolution continue? It seems to me, in view of the political situation in the whole world, that no responsible group can oppose the coming computer revolution. Therefore, it seems to me we have a real one which will continue. Now, I believe the reports we hear of this revolution are very misleading. They often underestimate the speed which is going on and the importance. But worst of all, they tend to emphasize material aspects, how much we will have of this and that, how much leisure, what wonderful new things we will have, and they fail to discuss the impact it will have on our view of ourselves and our world outlook.
Imagine you're an ET, let's say a humanoid level intelligence and you come in your rocket and you visit the Earth 2 billion years ago. And all you see in terms of life are just bacteria everywhere. And you zap all the bacteria and you change the DNA so that it's pretty well impossible that those bacteria are never in the future capable of forming multi-cell creatures. So, no octopi, fish, snakes, no human beings. With our human perspective, how would you feel about that act done by the ET in destroying all that wonderful future potential? It would be a kind of cosmic tragedy, wouldn't it? So you see the analogy now? Is humanity now going to freeze the level of evolution at our current puny human level when we could go vastly beyond that? We could build gods if we wanted to.
You might say that current human civilization is in an unstable state, and there are sort of two possibilities. We can wipe ourselves out completely, or we can fall into the attractor of superintelligence, smarter minds, building still smarter minds, until that reaches some kind of stable state. But human civilization as it stands is unstable.
A man in a lifetime. The lifetime of all mankind is but a brief moment in the long history of this earth of ours. These machines, which have been with us less than a millionth of a second in terms of the temporal span of man's history, have already given promise of deep and far-reaching change in our way of life and way of thinking. But finally, the future, except in terms of trends and probabilities, is the great unknown. And the uses to which we put ourselves in relation to the marvelous machines of our own invention is perhaps the central moral and intellectual challenge of our own brief moment in time.